There is history of frequent lower respiratory tract infection, no history of cyanotic spells, no history of any anasarca, pedal edema, anything. The child was born to a consanguineous marriage, and there was no other member in the family having a history of heart disease. This is a very brief history, basically history of breathing difficulty, feeding difficulty, and poor weight gain. There was partial relief with medication and history of recurrent respiratory tract infection. So a brief history suggestive of increased pulmonary blood flow. So what is the take on with this short history?
Okay, Lalita, you want me to answer?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So so there is no history of cyanosis. I suppose that you have written no history of cyanotic spell, but supposing there is no history of cyanosis also, the history is quite characteristic of acyanotic congenital heart disease with increased pulmonary blood flow, and the list includes ventricular septal defect, patent ductus arteriosus, and sometimes double shunts or atrioventricular septal defect. So I think excluding atrial septal defect, because AST of the secunda variety is very rare to present with increased flow situation or symptoms at that age. Usually ASDs go sort of asymptomatic. So I would just think of post-tricuspid left to right shunts, and the commonest disease being ventricular septal defect. So we should keep that as the first diagnosis. Then would be large patent ductus arteriosus, and then we've got some more like atrioventricular septal defect, LV2RA shunt, or even AP window, aortopulmonary window. So these are some of the other conditions that one can think of. But going statistically, I would put PST as number one.
Because you already brought the idea about the ASD is less likely to be present at this age group, can we think of the common atrium with especially associated with mitral regurgitation, left AV wall regurgitation? So can we have the presentation this early age group?
I mean, rarely, yes, but I think common atrium or a very large ASD, which is almost a part of atrioventricular septal defect profile or the spectrum, usually will not produce heart failure unless there is significant AV valve regurgitation. Even AV valve regurgitation with common atrium or let's say with atrioventricular septal defect can of course lead on to heart failure. Therefore, the patients may present early, but you have to have really significant AV valve regurgitation for them to present with an ASD. So if you have an ASD with significant mitral regurgitation, yes, but mitral regurgitation at that age or 5 months or infancy would be very unusual for a straightforward secundum ASD. Usually it develops later.
Yeah. Is there any progression of the left AV wall regurgitation occurs in this condition?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I said. It might start with no regurgitation or very little, and then over a period of time, there is a gradual progression of mitral regurgitation. So usual presentation will be later, not so early in life. This is more like a shunt, like a large left to right shunt.
Ma'am, if we consider it as an AV canal defect, the different variety, partial, transitional, intermediate, and all of them only complete will present at this stage, or any other cases complicated can present at this stage?
I think complete is definitely going to present very early in life, even before 5 months, maybe at 3 months, 2 months, or even earlier. But partial will only present with heart failure if there is significant mitral regurgitation secondary to cleft of the mitral valve. So we know that in partial variety of AVSD, sometimes you get cleft of the mitral valve, and that can produce mitral regurgitation, which is actually not a cleft, it's like a pseudo cleft. And that mitral regurgitation, if significant, then that can lead on to heart failure in infancy also. So even the partial variety or the intermediate variety can present with heart failure provided there is significant mitral regurgitation, because the shunts are not very large in the partial and the intermediate or transitional variety.
All cases of complete AV canal defect, do they present early, or there are conditions where they do not present or anything like that?
I think most of them will present very early. In fact, the mortality, most of the time, the patients do not survive beyond 1 or 2 years of life because of heart failure. So they die of heart failure. But I think a specific subgroup of patients where you have severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, which has not shown a regression to a very low level, the shunts may not be very large. And that may be, condition where you don't have much features of congestive heart failure because the shunts are not very large, and that is more because of elevated pulmonary vascular resistance. And I think typically, if we are talking about a patient with that kind of a profile, I would say Down syndrome is very likely, because in Down syndrome, high PVRI or high pulmonary artery pressures prevent significant left to right shunts, and therefore patient may not get into failure. But in general, I think all of them would first go into failure and then go into a severe pulmonary arterial hypertension stage later.
Actually, there is a question.
Yeah.
There is a question from the Deepa, that is, will severe left AV wall regurgitation in 15 months child can cause a recurrent lower respiratory tract infection? I think it is the lower respiratory tract infection is because of the shunt, not because of an MR.
Yes.
But the MR increases the shunt. So we need to remember that when there is mitral regurgitation, the left to right shunt actually increases. So these are the patients who may actually present with recurrent LRTI because the shunt has been aggravated because of the presence of mitral regurgitation.
Especially in AV canal defect, because of the cleft mitral, the MR is towards the septum. So the shunt increases much more than regular ESTs.
So presence of MR increases the left to right shunt, increases the symptoms. So
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Ma'am, you would like to add anything else to the diagnosis at this stage? Vijayalakshmi?
No, that's fine. Only thing that the Down syndrome is present in almost 50% of patients, and that makes the hypertension much earlier and presentation much earlier. So that point has to be kept in mind.
Okay. Next slide, please. As correctly pointed out, this child also had an abnormal faces. The face was flat, round, looks as if it was always smiling, with a protruding tongue, wide separated eyes with upward slanting eyelids, short, broad hands with relatively short fingers and toes, which is fitting into a diagnosis of Down syndrome. A weight of 8.3 kgs and a height of 79 centimeters, no anemia, no cyanosis, no jaundice, no clubbing, no lymphadenopathy, no pedal edema. Pulse rate of 126 per minute, regular, normal volume and character, no radiostimular delay, respiratory rate of 24 per minute, and the blood pressure of 96/50. So this is in the general examination and the syndromic feature suggestive of Down syndrome. And any other syndromic association we need to see here? Down's is, as you said, is the most common. Anything else we need to see here other than that?
I think when you see AV septal defect, I think the only syndrome that is associated with AV septal defect is Down syndrome. There's another syndrome called Iver-Mark syndrome. I don't know much about it, but it is another sort of a syndrome, Iver-Mark syndrome, IVEMARK syndrome, where also you may have association of AV septal defect, quite significant association, but that's a very, very rare condition. Down's is much more common. So I think if there is a syndromic association, then, and if the child has Down syndrome, one has to think about an atrioventricular septal defect in these patients. And as Dr. Vijayalakshmi said, that a very large number of Down syndrome babies have AVSD, as much as 40%. So all the Down syndrome, AVSD is seen in 40% of Down syndrome as compared to 0.3% of normal babies. So it is a very common congenital heart. But I think we must also remember that Down syndrome children can also have VSDs and tetralogies, in other conditions. It's not that it is always AVSD, but yes, it is AVSD is far, far, far more common than a straightforward VSD.
Yeah, some more syndromic associations which we can also, as Madam mentioned, is we can think of is the Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome, where the common atrium is much more the common presentation than a complete AV canal defect. And the other one is heterotaxy, probably this more common with asplenia than with the polysplenia. But these things can be discussed when we are talking about the type of the Raslis classification, because the type B and the type C varieties are the common in these type of the heterotaxis than in the other varieties.
So I think I think it's an important point that you're making, that Down syndrome babies usually do not have heterotaxy when they have AVSD. So heterotaxy association with Down syndrome is very unusual. Usually, if there is a heterotaxy with AVSD, then that child will not have Down syndrome. So Down syndrome babies have a typical balanced AVSD with normal spleen and no evidence of heterotaxy.
In Down syndrome, we can have a combination of complete AV canal defect as well as TOF or DORV, anything that is also commonly seen, right?
Yes. So if you have a cyanotic child and you are making a diagnosis of TOF in a Down syndrome, please think of AVSD with PS. and not a straightforward VSD with PS. So if there's a Downs with tetralogy-like features clinically, we should think about atrioventricular septal defect associated with pulmonary stenosis. If there is a large VSD-like features in a Down syndrome, please think of atrioventricular septal defect. So that is how I think diagnosis of Down syndrome help us to sort of pinpoint the structural disease as AVSD.
Coming to the cardiovascular examination, the jugular venous pressure was elevated with a prominent V wave. Apex was LV type of apex in the 6th intercostal space in the anti-axillary line. It was hyperdynamic. Grade 1/3 parasternal pulsations present, palpable P2, a systolic hill in the left lower sternal area. On auscultation, S1 was single, S2 single variable split. P2 was louder than A2, and no additional sounds were present. An apical holosystolic murmur of grade 3/6 radiating to the right sternal border was present. Another murmur, 4/6 pansystolic murmur, most prominent in the 3rd and 4th left intercostal space, high pitched and no variation with respiration is seen. So the positive features are a prominent elevated JVP with a prominent V wave, LV type of apex with a systolic thrill, and then we have a loud P2, and there are two murmurs. I'm not sure whether they are the same murmur heard in two different areas or there are two different murmurs heard. We basically have an apical holosystolic murmur suggestive of an MR murmur, and the other murmur at the lower sternal border, which I am not sure whether it is the same murmur which is heard here or possibly a VSD murmur. What is your take, Madam, here?
So since we are thinking in terms of severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, I would not think that VSD will produce any murmur here, because VSD is going to be large, patient is in failure. So whether it is AVSD or not AVSD, the murmur should not be coming because of the VSD, because here we are thinking of a large defect between the right ventricle and left ventricle, therefore equalizing their pressures. So VSD may produce a very soft early systolic murmur in these cases because of severe pulmonary arterial hypertension. However, if you have large flow situation and you hear a pansystolic murmur, you have to bring in AV valve regurgitation and diagnosis in this setting. And therefore, if there are two murmurs, that's a bit unusual. But if there is one murmur, I would probably think about mitral regurgitation because it is at the apex. Whether the same murmur is coming at the lower sternal border, since there is no variation with the respiration, it will be hard for us to say whether there are two murmurs or not, and especially in a child of 8.3 kg, because in adult you can do inching. You can start with apex and then keep coming towards the left lower sternal border and in a sort of inching method, and then the murmur will disappear and reappear. Then you know there are two murmurs. Mitral regurgitation is at the apex and tricuspid regurgitation at the base, at the lower left sternal border. However, in a 15-month-old in an 8.3 kg who has a small chest, I think it may be very difficult to say that there are two murmurs. I would just say that if the character of the murmur looks same, if there is no variation with the respiration, we would probably can say that there is only one.
Yes, Vijayalakshmi madam.
I perfectly agree with what Dr. Anita is saying, because once you have a palpable P2 and a loud P2, that means there is a pulmonary hypertension. And you all know that once the pulmonary hypertension occurs, the VSD murmur becomes softer and shorter. But only thing that the mitral regurgitation murmur, invariably, it is soft, blowing, and it is never 4/6. So here it is 4/6. So it could be due to the abnormality rather than the regular MR that we get in a rheumatic. So this is a different MR compared to rheumatic. So the regular teaching that the pansystolic murmur that is soft and blowing conducted to the axilla in a case of RHD is not so in this case, because it is directed more towards the what you call the sternum, and then it could be little harsher.
Yeah, actually, do we expect any other murmurs just because of assuming that it is a complete AV canal, the defect, other than the murmurs what we heard?
You can expect a systolic murmur at the base of the heart, which is because of flow across the pulmonary valve. But again, it's not going to be a very loud murmur. You could probably get grade 2/6 or 3/6 systolic, ejection systolic murmur at the base, like you get in a straightforward VSD and ASD. that would be more like a flow murmur across the pulmonary valve, because whatever flow is happening into the ventricle or atria left to right has to pass through pulmonary valve. So you can expect that. And also you should get a flow diastolic murmur across the mitral valve in these cases, because it is a post tricuspid shunt, or even a pre tricuspid shunt should give you a tricuspid flow murmur. So one expects flow murmurs in diastole at the apex, and sometimes even at the left lower sternal border if there's an atrial shunt also happening, which is something one would expect here, and that will really help us to know that there is a large shunt happening which is more than 2:1. Even mitral regurgitation can actually give you a flow murmur across the mitral valve in the form of a short mid-diastolic murmur at apex. So I would be expecting that, but with a pulse rate of 126 in an 8.3 Down syndrome baby, I'm not sure how much you can make out these things. But I think having, or let's say noting a diastolic murmur, or especially looking for a diastolic murmur, is very, very helpful, especially when you are thinking in terms of operability issues in a 15-month-old child. So if you have a good flow murmur, that gives you comfort that this child is still having a large left to right flow, and therefore it is likely to be operable.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to comment on this diastolic and flow murmurs are only, but that gives a clue whether about the operability. So we have to go out of the way to see for them in these conditions. Yes.
At this stage, I think both the murmurs possibly could be one and could be more of a AV valve regurgitation murmur.
Absolutely. And as Vijay said, that, AV valve regurgitation murmur is not the typical MR murmur of RHD. So you can hear it quite medially. And I would just say that it's the same murmur. If I was able to say that the murmur at the sternal border was increasing with inspiration, I would have been more sure of two murmurs. But here I would think it's just one murmur.
Can we go to the ECG? Next slide, please. So this is the ECG of the child, showing a rate of around 100 to 110 per minute, and there is short PR interval, left axis deviation, counterclockwise rotation, and right atrial enlargement is present. No evidence of left atrial enlargement. We have biventricular enlargement here, both RV, and we can see the V3 and V4. There is evidence of biventricular enlargement. Short PR, right atrial enlargement, counterclockwise, left axis loop, and biventricular enlargement. Of course, V5 and V6 are not showing a prominent R wave, but I guess if we go a bit more laterally, possibly we might get that.
Yes, so I agree. Sorry.
How does the ECG help in case of to diagnose between the different types of shunts?
So once you have an ECG showing left axis deviation in a patient who has a large left to right shunt in a post tricuspid type, like this child has, I think it immediately brings your attention to atrioventricular septal defects. So all atrioventricular septal defects practically would have a left axis deviation. Like here you have it almost -90, which is more than -30. So left axis deviation is quite a specific thing for somebody who's showing you large left to right shunt to say that it is atrioventricular septal defect. I think the only exception would be that if there is atrioventricular septal defect with pulmonary stenosis, like you have in tetralogy or Fallows, in some cases, you may not see left axis deviation. It will still be there in majority of the cases, but in some cases, you may get actually a normal or even a right axis deviation. That's number one. Number two, if the axis is also, manipulated a little bit by the balanced nature of the atrioventricular septal defect. If you have an unbalanced AVSD, where the conduction system may not be elongated like in a normal balanced variety, you may get axes which are other than the typical left axis deviation. So generally, I would say 95% of AVSD would show left axis deviation like this one, and it really helps you to localize the diagnosis to AVSD in a patient who's clinically looking like a large VSD. So it's really helpful. I would say the only exception is that if you have a muscular VSD, otherwise not a VSD, but a VSD which is in the muscular septum, then that can also sometimes give you left axis deviation. So you have to keep that in mind. But as you can see, her rest of ECG is not fitting with a large VSD also. You have too much of right ventricular hypertrophy. There is some suggestion of biventricular hypertrophy if we go by V3, V4, but definitely right ventricular hypertrophy is there. Maybe there is left ventricle. If we go V7, V8, we might be able to get left ventricle forces with some Q waves suggestive. Again, having left ventricular forces will help us to determine that this patient is likely to be operable. So that is the significance of trying to look for left ventricular forces in addition to right ventricular hypertrophy.
Yeah, actually, when clinically there is a left ventricular an impulse, we expect it to be some left ventricular forces are there. On the top of it, of course, as Madam said, going to the V7 and V8 may able to pick it up, but there is a loss of an R wave from the V5 to the V6, which usually doesn't happen in the case of the persistent left ventricular hypertrophy, which is going to be picked up in the lateral leads.
I agree.
Yeah. And one more other features which can be they happen along with this suspected AVSD is the prolonged PR interval. Actually, it is seen in the 25% of the cases. It is mainly because of increased intraatrial or AV nodal conduction time that causes this prolongation of the PR interval. Of course, the left axis deviation and the counterclockwise loop is a very classical of these things. And here the biventricular is represented by the V3 or V4 as the equiphasic complexes at the present.
Yeah, I agree, but it is pretty borderline. As you can see, it is almost reaching only 40 and not 45, as one would expect the catch factor phenomena to be positive. So I'm not very certain about left ventricle, especially as you said in V6, you don't see any R wave. It's pure S wave, and V7, V8 may not show R wave. But since we examined the child and found it to be LV apex, I think the left ventricular forces may be there, but at least the ECG is not very classical of LVH. Yes, there is RVH and left axis deviation. Yes, PR prolongation is very common actually in AVSD. Sometimes 40 to 50% of cases may show PR prolongation. Even other blocks, including complete heart block, is also seen in AVSD as compared to other left to right shunts.
We are always talking about the AVSD.
Yeah, unbalanced ventricles. So ECG, we will have any evidence of, whether it is RV hypoplasia or anything we can.
Yeah. So if you have a unbalanced AVSD and you have the LV as the dominant chamber, that means the valve is more committed to LV, then you are likely to see left ventricular hypertrophy in your ECG. If you have the other way, that right ventricle is the dominant chamber, then you will have right ventricular hypertrophy. Even the axis sometimes may change in some of these cases because of the dominance of one ventricle, but by and large majority will still have left axis deviation.
We are continuously talking about AVSD only. Why can't it be a corrected transposition of the greater arteries VSD with MR?
Okay, so I think again you cannot rule that out completely because it could be there, but the very fact that you said S2 is wide split, I think if you are hearing both the components so well, L position is little unlikely because in them it tends to be a single because the aorta is anterior and PA is posterior. That's number one. Number two, in corrected transposition, we tend to see absence of R wave in V1 or the septal depolarization V1, which you don't see over here. And of course, there is no Q wave in V6, which is, there should be absence of Q wave in V6, but here V6 is very different than usual. Again, the T wave inversions in in AVL are also very suggestive. T wave inversion are suggestive of corrected transposition. So I think going by all the findings, it's very unlikely that there is corrected transposition. I think clinically, we should think about a large VSD or a VSD plus ASD combination. And the moment you see this ECG, go for AVSD.
Next slide, please. We have few questions on ECG.
Okay.
Say Katz-Vogel phenomena, V1 should have prominent R wave along with V2, V3, V4 showing 45 mm.
So actually, yeah. So actually, that is not right. For saying Katz-Vogel phenomena, at least two mid-precordial leads, two or more. So here, if we are taking V3 and V4, then at least two. So two or more mid-precordial leads showing R plus S of more than 45. It's not necessary to V1 to have prominent R wave. It's likely because you are expecting RVH and LVH, but the criteria by itself means two or more mid-precordial leads showing R plus S of more than 45.
Coming to the chest X-ray PA view, situs solitus, well-centered, well-penetrated film. There is cardiomegaly with LV apex, right atrial enlargement. There seems to be a double shadow, possibly a left atrial enlargement also. The pulmonary bay is filled and increased pulmonary vascular markings are seen. So cardiomegaly with LV enlargement, biatrial enlargement, pulmonary arterial hypertension, and of course increased pulmonary vascular marking. This is all suggestive of an increased left to right shunt.
Yeah. I don't think it gives you the diagnosis, because this would be seen even in a straightforward VSD plus ASD or VSD with LV to RA shunt, because RA enlargement alone RA enlargement is unusual for a straightforward VSD. So we have to think of ASD plus VSD or a VSD with LV to RA also. I think what is important over here is cardiomegaly, because again, cardiomegaly gives us a little bit of comfort that if it is because of the shunt, then the child may still be operable. And I think very, very importantly, there is severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, not because pulmonary artery segment is prominent, that's one, but look at the pruning of the right pulmonary artery. As soon as you go to the third level branch, the pulmonary artery practically disappears. The lateral 1/3 of the lung, at least on the right side, looks very dark. So there is central plethora, but there is peripheral leukemia, and there is pruning or sudden cutoff of the right descending pulmonary artery branch. So there is evidence of severe pulmonary arterial hypertension. Situs is solitus, as you said, because you can see the stomach bubble, and cardiomegaly is there. So with this, my diagnosis would be large left to right shunt, perhaps VSD plus ASD with severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, but the patient is likely to be operable because there is significant cardiomegaly on the X-ray.
Significant cardiomegaly, ideally we say that it is not seen in VSD, rather it is seen in case of ASD. Is that why you are saying it could be a combination of ASD plus VSD, or?
No, I am saying because of the RA enlargement, because in a straightforward VSD, you don't expect RA to be enlarged, and here you are right, RA is enlarged by all means. So once RA is enlarged, then with VSD alone, you can't explain that. ASD, I don't want to make ASD alone because there is a left atrial enlargement, there is LV apex, and we know that ASD is not likely to present at this age. So that is why I'm saying with the second ultrasound being wide and fixed or wide split, P2 loud, I would think of VSD plus ASD. But after the ECG, I'm going to narrow it down to atrioventricular septal defect, because we know that you have both atrial and ventricular shunt in a case of atrioventricular septal defect. So I think it fits in well with AVSD, especially after we've looked at the ECG.
Yeah, the size of the heart comes down in a case of the VSD once it is an ICR meningitis, or otherwise till the time it is the sign of the good increased blood flow. Yes. And the other associated features are also of course it is a situs solitus is very important when you are suspecting the case in AVSD, because in heterotraxy has to be ruled it out. And another features which can be associated findings are the persistent left SVC, especially this is connects to that of the coronary sinus. And a very less common, less frequently seen ones are the pulmonary venous anomalies, so that we can see further signs of the figure of the Nage or the prominent superior vena cava, also the worth mentioning in these type of the cases.
Yeah, but usually pulmonary venous anomalies are also associated with heterotaxy and are unusual in patients with Down syndrome. Because as I said, Down syndrome has pure AVSD. It has the pure form of AVSD. The only thing it can have in addition is an LSVC. But heterotaxy, this polyasplenia, asplenia, IVC interruption, TAPVC, all those are not features of an AVSD associated with Down syndrome. Those are features of AVSD associated with no syndrome or with normal syndromic feature or normal chromosomal pattern. So in this particular patient, I don't expect TAPVC or any of those unusual features that we see with heterotaxy.
You are mentioning about right atrial enlargement, that's why you are considering the associated ASD. Yes. But with this much of the pulmonary arterial hypertension, don't you expect the right atrial enlargement? Do we have to bring the ASD in addition?
I think in a straightforward VSD at 15 months of age, even if you have severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, RA is not enlarged, because tricuspid regurgitation is very, very unusual in a straightforward VSD, because the RV pressure never goes above the LV pressure. So tricuspid regurgitation to cause RA enlargement in a straightforward post-tricuspid shunt like VSD or PDA is something that develops in 30s and 40s years of life, not at 50 months. So I would not expect any RA enlargement, even if the child is going into Eisenmenger syndrome secondary to VSD. Of course, here we are not even thinking of Eisenmenger because there is cardiomegaly already.
There is one question. Since the child has PSM and left atrial enlargement, cardiomegaly on X-ray, can we comment on the severity of the AV valve regurgitation here?
So I would say that there is cardiomegaly. That's a hard fact. Whether you want to blame it onto the shunt or you want to blame it onto the AV valve regurgitation is the question. If you are thinking of large left to right shunt, then cardiomegaly has to be blamed to left to right shunt and not necessarily to AV valve regurgitation. But clinically, you have an apex which is shifted. Clinically, you have a loud murmur grade 3 by 6, which is of MR. So MR has to be severe. But also we must remember that the more MR gives more left to right shunt. So it is possible that the child has a very large shunt as well as severe mitral regurgitation. Which one is contributing more to cardiomegaly is very difficult to say by the X-ray.
Next slide, please. Go back. Coming to the 2D echo, situs solitus, levocardia, normally related great arteries, normal systemic venous drainage and AVVA concordance, complete AV canal defect with a single AV valve with 5 leaflets, Rashleigh type A, ostium primum ASD of size 6 mm with left to right shunt, a large inlet VSD with left to right shunt with moderate left AV valve regurgitation present, moderate TR with an RVSP of 60 mm of Fujii, no AR, no PR, good biventricular function, no associated PDA coarctation, left LVOT obstruction or RVOT obstruction. So can you tell us the role of echo? We know that is the main thing in diagnosis, the type of AV canal defect, and how to go about for doing the echo and what things to see on echo in the case of AV canal defect.
So I think echo is the sort of, the only tool that you require to make a diagnosis, because you can see everything by echocardiography, and I'm sure Vijay will be showing some nice pictures of echocardiography. So echocardiography gives you everything except pulmonary vascular resistance. So if you are suspecting high pulmonary vascular resistance, that may be the only reason to catheterize these children. Otherwise, you get everything by echocardiography. So as you have written, one has to be very, very systematic, starting with the situs solitus, systemic venous drainage, pulmonary venous drainage, because sometimes you can have abnormality in the pulmonary venous drainage, pulmonary IVC interruption, etc. So you try and see all that by echo. And then, of course, you decide what kind of AV septal defect are you dealing with. Is it complete AV septal defect, partial, intermediate, Rashleigh type A, B, C? And I think I will just leave those details to Vijay to explain. And of course, look for associations like AV valve regurgitation, whether there is left, right AV valve regurgitation. Again, here we need not worry too much about the TR velocity to get RV pressure. It will be good to see what kind of shunt is happening across the VSD. If the VSD is showing a low velocity shunt, then we know that there is significant right ventricular hypertension, and you don't really need to worry about the TR velocity because it's going to be high. So don't try to calculate the RV pressure based on tricuspid regurgitation velocity, because you know that there is a large VSD and RV pressure is equal to LV pressure. So if you take blood pressure of this child as it was 96 systolic, the RV pressure is also going to be 96 systolic. And then of course look for LVOT obstructions like coarctations, AS, subalveolar AS, and look for RVOT obstruction also. So practically everything you can make out, and in some of the short access view you can actually see very well all the common leaflets, whether there are 2 annuli or 1 annulus, and I would just leave it to the to Vijay to explain through images.
Yeah. Anita and Jyotsna and Lalita, they have discussed the clinical case. I'll go to the echo and the angio and what to tell the surgeon, and that is most important. So atrioventricular septal defects, or it's a group of anomalies which share varieties of a spectrum of abnormalities. And this spectrum, it is characterized by common AV junction coexisting with the deficient AV septal, anomalies that range in severity from small ostium primum ASD to a complete AV septal defect, and they are named as atrioventricular communis or atrioventricular canal defects or common atrioventricular canal defects or common atrioventricular orifice or endocardial cushion defects. Varieties of names are there, but the commonest used are AV canal defect or the endocardial cushion defects, and also the atrioventricular septal defect, that is AVST. Now coming to the background, the echocardiography has grown by leaps and bounds, so much so that it has replaced the invasive catheterization, as Dr. Anita already told you, and it has emerged as an important non-invasive method for assessing the atrioventricular septal defect, that is the AVST, or atrioventricular canal defect. Echocardiographic features of AVST are so characteristic that once understood, it is very easy to diagnose and decide and tell the surgeon what has to be told, and the surgeon can prepare his options. Now, you must understand this here. You can see that between the attachment of the mitral valve and the tricuspid valve, you have a small bit of portion that is the atrioventricular septum. And this is the portion when it is abnormal, then both mitral and aortic valve will be attached at the same level, and that's what happens in the AV canal defect. So here the plane of AV junction and important, and AV junction area of heart where atrial myocardium is continuous with the ventricular myocardium, and that is the portion. So here you can see that atria is continuous with the ventricle in this atrioventricular septum, and that is the portion which is involved in this cases. Now, before we go to the echo, let us understand the embryology and understand what they are. And here you can see that endocardial cushion defect, invariably there is a deficiency of the atrioventricular component of the AV septum. And in the case of incomplete or the partial, as you see here, you can see that there is only ostium primum AST. And the two AV valves are there, there is no VST. And this is the incomplete or the partial AVST. And then we have the second one, that's a transitional AVST. In this, you have a very small VST along with the ostium primum AST, and two valves are there. So far, these two are easy for the surgeon to repair. And the third one is the intermediate type where the single annulus is there. So the whole annulus is single, but you have two orifices. So still with the large ostium primum AST and the large VST, still the surgeon can operate very well. But when it comes to the complete AV canal defect, where there is a common AV valve and with the 5 leaflets, and this is the one where both the echo echo is extremely important to show the surgeon what has to be done. So let us see the classification. In this, the partial AVST, when the two bridging leaflets are joined to each other by a tongue of tissue, then driving the AV valve into two separate orifices. Thus, the partial AVST has just ostium primum AST defect with the two distinct mitral valve and the tricuspid valve separately. And this is the one which I showed diagrammatically. Then the complete AVST is the one where there is a bridging leaflets are totally free and guarding the opening of both the atria and the respective ventricle as a common opening. And as a result, atria and the ventricles are not guarded at all, and they become almost one with the single AV valve in the middle. And thus,
Madam, I have a question here. Is that a transitional AVSD and intermediate AVSD, which is classically describes all those things, is that still applicable, or do you think that the terminology has to be the present, or it is no more relevant now?
Josna, these are the two major ones, and the transitional and intermediate are the subsets. So we'll come to the subsets afterwards. So
is that is acceptable nowadays, or it is not useful much because the partial AVSD can be explained in different ways also?
No, to understand what the anatomy is, better to know it, whether it is applicable or not applicable. But one should understand what is partial, what is complete. And once we understand, then we'll go to the subset and then decide what it is. In a partial, you have the anterior and the septal leaflets are like this, and then the tricuspid annuli are totally separate. The mitral and tricuspid annuli are separate in this partial. So this is the complete AV canal defect. You can see that there is an ostium primum AST, and then the inlet VST and the single AV valve. And this is how you see almost like a single chamber, they are connected. Now, the third type is, this is the subset of the partial AVST. The additional to the finding, there is a small inlet VST that is partially occluded by a dense caudal tissue. And this is also easy because the surgeon has to close the AST and then the rest of it is all right. And then we have an intermediate one, which is a subset of the complete AV canal defect. So this is the transitional is the subset of the partial AV canal defect, whereas intermediate one is the subset of the complete AV canal defect. And here there is a distinct and left AV valve orifices despite having only one common annulus. That means the annulus is single, but the orifices are separate. So here you can see that there is a mitral valve here, the tricuspid valve. So both orifices are separate, but there is a VST as well as the AST. And how to make out whether it is a single or two orifices, you can see that the two regurgitant jets are very nicely seen. And in the short axis, you can see the two valves separately despite of having the annulus single. So here you can see that this is the MR jet and that is the TR jet with the collar Doppler. Now in the intermediate, what happens is the anterior bridging valve and the posterior bridging valves are fused, and as a result, it is so that AV valves have a tricuspid and the mitral component separately. So this is how it looks. Now, when we come to the morphological features of AVST, this is common to all the types, all the varieties. The absence of AV septum resulting in the AV valve being the same at the same level. That means the tricuspid and the mitral valves are at the same level. Normally, as I showed you in the beginning, the tricuspid valve is more apical and the mitral valve is higher up. But in this, they are both at the same level. That is the hallmark of this. Now, common AV orifice with the common fibrous ring makes the orifice ovoid instead of spectacles. See, normally mitral and the tricuspid valve, they look like Gandhiji's spectacles, no, like two orifices. But here it will be like ovoid because that oval common fibrous, that is the thing, it contains the both the orifices. So abnormal configuration of the common AV valve, and the 5 basic leaflets are seen. So 3 from the tricuspid and 2 from the mitral, all together 5 we see the leaflets. And the left AV valve is tri-leaflet valve, abnormal, and abnormal rotation of this posterior medial papillary muscles are seen. And the inlet and the outlet disproportionate, resulting into the elongated gooseneck deformity. So all these things I'm going to show in the echo, but one should remember that these are the basic features, morphological features of AVST. Now here you can see that in the morphology, this is the mitral valve with the 2 cusps, and this is the tricuspid valve with the 3 cusps. And when it becomes the common AV valve, it becomes oval. So here you can see that there are 2 circles like the spectacles, but when it becomes common, it becomes oval. And then you have anterior bridging and the posterior bridging, and then the 5 leaflets are seen. So this is how you can see the common AV valve in the short axis. So this is how you see the 2 valve orifices, and this is how you see the single orifice in the autopsy picture, and this is how you see in the echo. Now here usually it consists of 5 leaflets, 2 of the from the mitral and 3 from the tricuspid, and you have a bridging leaflet. So this is the superior bridging leaflets here, and this is the inferior bridging leaflets. So apart from that, you have an anterosuperior on the RV side and the inferior on the RV side. That means there are 2 on the RV side, and on the LV side, the left, you have the left mural cusp. So totally we have 5 cusps, 2 bridging superior and inferior, and then 2 more on the RV side and 1 from the LV side. So totally we have the 5 leaflets in the common AV valve. Before
Madam, can I add a little bit about these leaflets, because it is not as simply the 3 of tricuspid and the 2 of the mitral.
Yes.
Usually the anterior bridging leaflets corresponding to the superior half of the anterior mitral leaflet, whereas the posterior leaflets are the similar and the lateral leaflets are similar. But the posterior bridging leaflet is the combination of the septal tricuspid leaflet and the inferior half of the anterior mitral leaflet.
Absolutely correct. That's right. That's right. And before we start doing the echo, we must know what are the things that we have to look for. So one has to fully evaluate the components of the AVST and to assess for any associated abnormalities. That's very important. As Anita already suggested, that they can have DORV, they can have tetralogy of Fallot, they can have TAPVC. So all those things have to be evaluated. One should not be happy of just detecting the AVST. Now define the size of the atrial and the ventricular components. It's very important, and especially the shunt, whether there is a left-right shunt or the right-to-left shunt or the bidirection shunt, at what level, especially when there is a pulmonary artery hypertension. So AV valve attachment need to be defined, and function of the AV valve should be assessed well with both the pulse Doppler as well as the color Doppler. And the balance of AV valve above the ventricle is extremely important because this is the one which helps the surgeon to decide how to operate. And additional ASTs, because apart from the ostium primum, they can have a sinus venosus or AST or a PFO, or they can have additional VSTs, and all that have to be looked for. And apart from that, the outflow tract should be interrogated, looking for any obstruction in the LVOT or the RVOT. Now, coming to what are the goals of echocardiography? Before we come to the conclusion, we must see that all parameters are looked for and what are the things to be looked for. So here in the atrial component, we have to look for the ostium primum AST and the size of the AST, the direction of the shunt, and additional AST. And in the same way for the VST, the size of the VST, direction of the shunt, and also additional VSTs. And apart from that, we have to assess whether it is a Rastelli type A, B, or C. And this will help the surgeon to decide his strategy. And presence and degree of the valve regurgitation is extremely important, because presence of regurgitation, severe regurgitation, the outcome can be very bad. And sometimes just cleft mitral stitching, the MR will disappear and everything will be fine. So note whether the right or the left-sided AV valves regurgitations are there. And sometimes they can have the dual orifice. That is, the mitral valve will be like a double valve mitral valve.
It can be a double valve mitral valve or any other abnormalities of the mitral valve, like the parachute mitral valve and all, can also be present in case of AV canal defect.
Parachute is unlikely, but papillary muscles can be very close, and sometimes they may appear like a single papillary muscle, and the chordae can be attached to the single papillary muscle. But it is not
important, because before we go for the surgery, because such mitral valves can create problem during the surgery.
Correct.
Yeah, if you are talking about the papillary muscle abnormalities, usually the 2 papillary muscles are often a counterclockwise rotation occurs in them, and the posterior muscle is further from the septum than the normal, and the anterior muscle is closer to the septum. So this may contribute actually, along with the prominent anterolateral muscle bundle, for a progressive LVOT obstruction.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to show them as I showed to the go to the echoes later on. So Rastelli, along with Kirkland, they published in 1967 the Rastelli types, So in the Rastrelli type A, where the two are divided and then a bridging leaflet is divided and it is attached to the septum. And then it is divided, but a part of it is floating. And this is how the two orifices, the two annuluses, and then a single annulus with two orifices, or single annulus with the single AV valve. Any questions? So Rastrelli A, it is the commonest one, almost 75% of them. And Rastrelli C is 25%, and Rastrelli B is very uncommon. And here the unbalanced defects are very common in this. So to make it clearer for viewers, the Rastrelli type A is superior anterior leaflet of the common AV valve is divided. And you can see that this is how it is divided. And it is attached to the crest of the muscular interventricular septum. So the tip is attached to the septum. Whereas in case of type B, the bridging leaflet is divided, but it is not attached to the septum. So it is free. And then in type C, the superior bridging leaflet is common. It is not divided. It is undivided and it is free. So this is how the three types A, B, and C are made. So type A, it is divided, but the leaflet is attached to the crest of the interventricular septum. In case of B, it is divided but not attached. And in case of C, it is undivided and not attached. It is totally free. So is that clear?
The most common type is the type A.
Type A, yeah.
And in Down syndrome also it is the most common is type A.
Correct.
And the type C also we can see in case of
type C is the
Down.
second commonest, but type B is very rare.
Yes.
So this is how you can see that the superior bridging leaflet is divided and it is attached to the septum. Here you can see that. And in type B, it is divided, but it is free, not attached to the septum. So this is the septum and the bridging leaflet is free. And this is how you can see that this is the superior bridging leaflet. And this is the AST and this is the VST. And this is the inverted image of Rastrelli type C. And here you can see that the superior bridging leaflet is totally undivided and it is free and it is not attached to the septum at all. The septum is here and nothing is attached to the septum and with the free severe regurgitation. So these are the cases which are very difficult for the surgeon to operate and rectify. So these are the things to be told to the surgeon. So when we come to the echocardiac views, what to see in which view, the subcostal short axis view is the one which is best for seeing the common AV valve and how many cusps are there and all the features. And then subcostal four-chamber view is very good for the inferior bridging leaflet. And parasternal four-chamber view is important for the superior bridging leaflet. And subcostal or a parasternal short axis is important for the tri-leaflet of the AV valve. So this is how you see the common AV valve in systole and in diastole. This is in the common AV junction. So you can see that this is the common. And then here you can see that it is in the diastole. You can see the LV and the RV. And this is how the common AV valve is seen in the short axis. Any question? If there are no questions, shall I go ahead?
Yes, ma'am, you can.
Okay. After looking at the AV valve, then we move on to assess the other things. whether, as Anita was already mentioning, whether the ventricles are balanced or not balanced. This is very important because if they are unbalanced, the repair will be like a single ventricle type of repair. And hence, this is a very important portion. So here you have to see the distribution of the AV valve over the ventricles and assess the ventricular hypoplasia, whether RV is hypoplasia or the LV is hypoplastic. Then assess the outflow tract obstruction, whether there is a left outflow tract obstruction or the RVOT obstruction is there. So these are the very important to decide whether it is a balanced defect or not. Then coming to the hemodynamics, the flow across the AST, VST should be assessed, and the which side is the shunt. The peak velocity across the VST should be calculated, and then the severity of the AV valve regurgitation has to be looked for. More severe, the more difficult for the surgeon. So these are the things to be looked for when you are looking at the apical fourth chamber. Now coming to the AVST with the common AV valve, the superior bridging leaflet is like this. And this is the large ostium primum AST with the superior bridging leaflet. This is the inverted image that the pediatric cardiologist invariably follow. So this is the Rastelli type B, and then this is how there is a small AST, there is no VST, and then this is the type C. Now in this, the cleft mitral valve has to be assessed. Clinically, we discussed how the cleft mitral valve MR jets is towards the sternum. And here you can see that this is the anterior leaflet and this is the cleft. The gap between here, when you put the color Doppler, you can see that there is a gap or the cut in the, like how you have the cleft lip, here there is a cleft leaflet. And this in short axis, it's a very beautifully seen. And this is how, the cleft mitral valve is usually regurgitant and with the time becomes thickened. And here, it is very important to show the cleft mitral to the surgeon, because sometimes just closing that cleft mitral itself is enough to control the MR, and there is no need to do any other repair. And 10 to 15% of the AV valves are incompetent. They have the mitral regurgitation or the tricuspid regurgitation. Invariably, there is mild, and sometimes they can be very significant. So this is the parasternal long axis view. Here you can see the short axis, this is the cleft. Can you see that? This is the left ventricle, and that is the cleft, that is the cut between in the anterior leaflet. So this is how the two orifices are there, and you can see that through the cleft, the mitral regurgitation is quite severe here. So parasternal long axis view can, with the color Doppler, can assess the severity of the aortic regurgitation. Any questions on the cleft or the regurgitation?
Yeah, madam, can you say the cleft of this AVSD versus a normal cleft in the mitral valve? Is there any difference?
No, clefts are invariably associated with the AV canal defect. In the normal valve, you never get a cleft.
But usually the direction will give the whether it is associated with the AVSD or not. The anterior leaflet is directed towards the mid portion of the ventricular septum if it is a cleft of the AVSD, whereas if it is and along with an anterior rim of the septal defect. Whereas in contrast to isolated mitral valve leaflets, when it is not associated with an AVSD, it is directed towards to the aortic valve annulus. So the direction of the jet will give to the one of the clue whether it is associated with an AVSD or not. But of course, echo will directly show the prominent AVSD.
Ostium primum AST and the attachment. So I don't think that is a thing. But anyway, that's a good point to be remembered. Now coming to the balance type, unbalanced refers to the two distinct anatomical features, and this ventricular hypoplasia and malalignment of this junction, and latter may affect the ventricular size developmentally. So in unbalanced with the right dominant type, this is the common type usually associated with the arch hypoplasia and the coarctation of aorta. So the RV dominance is invariably associated with these features. And the second one is unbalanced with the left dominant type, where the left ventricle is dominant. It is usually associated with the pulmonary stenosis, pulmonary atresia, and the decision between balanced and unbalanced ventricle in borderline cases is best done by AV-valve index. And I'm going to show all that one after another. So here you can see that this is the balanced one. You can see that ostium primum AST is there. There is an additional AST is there, and there is an inlet VST is there, both the right and the left ventricle. This is the inverted image, and this is the regular image that the adults follow, and this is the image that the pediatric cardiologists follow. And here you can see that the RV and LV are almost equal. So this is the balanced VST, balanced AVST. Any question? Okay, if there is no question, we'll move to the unbalanced one. Here you can see that this is the inverted image, and this is not an inverted image. And here you can see that the LV is small and RV is dominant. So when there is the RV is dominant and it is bigger than the LV, this is the RV type of dominance. And here you can see that the LV and RV, but the RV is relatively smaller. But however, there is a little doubt, but LV appears bigger than the RV. And this is the ostium primum AST, and both the AV valves are at the same level, and they are two separate. This is not the single AV valve. Now, in this case, here you can see that this is a regular picture, and this is the inverted picture. You can see that the RV is small and LV is dominant. So when the LV is dominant, then RV is very small. Invariably, this will go for a single ventricle-like palliation. Any questions?
The attachment of the anterior bridging leaflet towards to the completely to the papillary muscle to the RV side, that causes the commitment of the both AV valves to the RV. Then we can expect the LV to be then hypoplastic. But you tell me, please explain how the LV can be dominant and RV is diminutive.
We'll finish this, and when we go to the attachment, at that time we can decide that. Okay? Okay. And this is the borderline one. So we are not very sure whether LV is really small or it is RV is dominant or not. So these are the borderline ones, and where the decision making becomes difficult. Clear-cut RV dominance or LV dominance is very easy, but when there is a borderline, then the decision making becomes difficult, because single ventricular repair is different compared to the complete correction. So when we come to the common AV valve morphology, so you can see that this is how the picture that we see in the autopsy. These are the two papillary muscles, or the septal portion, and this is the superior bridging leaflet, and this is the left mural leaflet, and this is the inferior septal leaflet portion, and this is the inferior leaflet from the RV side, and that this is the anterior anterosuperior leaflet. So you have two leaflets on the RV side, that is the anterosuperior and the inferior, and on the LV side you have only the left mural leaflet, apart from the two superior and the inferior bridging leaflet. So this is how you see, and this is exactly what we see in the echo in the same way. Now, when we come to the common AV valve, before repairing, the surgeon would like to know how much a portion is there on the RV side, how much is on the LV side. So then the common AV valve may be positioned equally or unequally. So it doesn't depend on which ventricle is dominant or not, but this common AV valve can be unbalanced, and part of it is on the RV, and how much part is there on the RV side has to be decided. So this is how the whole orifice is there, And then from the septum, we have to draw a line to make out how much is on the LA side and how much is on the RA side. And this has to be decided. And here you can see that this orifice is balanced because LV and the RV side are almost equal, whereas this is the left dominant one, then whereas in case of this, there is the right dominant. So this is how in the short axis we can see, visually we can assess, but just visual assessment is not enough. We have to calculate. And for this, the tracing the circumference of the common AV valve orifice has to be done during the end diastole. So freeze the frame and go on moving and come to the end diastole. At the end of the diastole, freeze it and then calculate the whole orifice. And once the circumference is then divided by the line drawn from this. So this I will show you actually. This is how the whole orifice is calculated, and then we draw a line from the calculate and dividing the whole thing, and then we calculate the area. The index is about 0.4%, that is the RV dominant. If it is 0.6%, that is the LV dominant. And for the balanced one, it has to be anywhere between 0.4 to 0.6. And here, in patients with the AV valve index, if it is less than 0.67% and a large VST is there, it is like a single ventricle repair has to be considered. So here, the earlier index was by Kohan et al. And now this is what we follow to decide whether it is a single ventricular repair or like a complete repair. And here, the the heart surgeons, the association has given a modified AV valve index. In this modified AV valve index, the mitral valve index between 0.4 to 0.6% is called as a balanced one. So this is a good one for the repair. And unbalanced is one when it is less than 0.4% or it is more than 0.6%, that is the left dominant. So anything which is less than 0.4%, RV dominant, right dominant, or more than 0.6, they become unbalanced, and because the surgeon has to take the decision. So any mitral AV valve index less than 0.2, they underwent the single ventricle repair, and anything more than 0.6 underwent biventricular repair. So heterogeneity of the surgical strategy was found among the patients with this patient anywhere between 0.19 to 0.39%. And these are the ones that has to be decided. So in case of balanced or unbalanced, severity of the unbalance of the common AV valve may not necessarily correlate with the degree of the ventricular hypoplasia. It may be disproportionate to that. And here you can see that both are balanced, but ventricle, two orifices are separate. And then we have to go for the angle. And this angle is the one which is very, very important. You can see here that when we calculate the angle, if it is more than 154 degrees, that is the obtuse angle in case of the balanced one. And when it is unbalanced, one is shorter than the other one. So this is the RV dominant and the LV is shorter. So the angle becomes acute, and this is the unbalanced. So this angle can be calculated, and then you can tell whether the angle is obtuse, that is in case of the balanced one, and or whether it is the acute one in case of the unbalanced one. So this is another parameter to decide whether it is balanced or unbalanced.
Madam, this has to be calculated in the short axis view.
No, this has to be in the apical 4-chamber view. See, this is in the apical 4-chamber view.
No, the angle.
The angle in the apical 4-chamber. This is apical 4-chamber view. This is the inverted picture. The inverted picture, this is the ostium primum ASD, this is the LV, and this is the RV. So from the tip, you draw to the annulus attachment, and this is how you get the balanced or unbalanced. This is large one, and this is the LV, and this is the RV. Now we move on to the inlet and the outlet. This is very important. You can see here that this is the inlet that you calculate the measurement from the apex to the attachment of the mitral leaflet at the annulus, and then from the apex to the aortic valve. So this is the outlet and this is the inlet. In case of AV canal defect, the outlet is elongated. This is the normal one. You can see that in the normal heart, there is not much difference. But whereas in case of AVST, the inlet dimension and outlet dimension, they vary. And as a result, the LVOT is elongated and causing the gooseneck deformity. So here you can see that I'm showing the autopsy picture as well as the real echo. Here the apical, this is the apical 5-chamber view where you get the aorta along with the ventricle and the chamber. This is the aorta. This is the aorta. And here you can see that the elongation is there. This is the aorta, the LVOT and the LV. Exactly you see here, this is the aorta and this is the LVOT and this is the LV and this is the superior bridging leaflet here. So this is called as the gooseneck deformity, and this gooseneck deformity I will show in the angio also. So you can see
the ideal view for seeing this is an apical 5-chamber or the parasternal?
5-chamber view.
Okay.
Yeah. 4-chamber view, we are not seeing the LVOT and the aorta.
No, what about the flat view where you showed that inflow and outflow? That is not the view, or you have to take only the apical 5-chamber?
Parasternal long axis view. In the parasternal long axis view, this is the parasternal long axis view. Can you see there? This is the parasternal long axis view. This is the LV, this is the LA, and this is the aorta. And the RV is dilated here. So this is the parasternal long axis view.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, this is the apical 5-chamber view, which is inverted. You understand? Apical 5-chamber view, in like how we do adult, it becomes difficult to conceive the gooseneck deformity. But when you invert it, it becomes almost like the actual heart. And this is what
Lalita's question is: should we do it in the parasternal long axis view or apical 5-chamber view to calculate these things? That's what her question is.
Yeah, that's what I said. In apical parasternal long axis view, you calculate the dimensions, but here you cannot see the gooseneck.
Okay.
So
okay. The morphology is better appreciated in the apical 5-chamber.
Correct.
Okay.
So inlet dimension and outlet dimensions are calculated in the parasternal long axis view. To look for the gooseneck deformity, you go to the apical 5-chamber view and invert the image. Only when you invert the image, you can get the gooseneck like this, exactly like how you have in the autopsy. Exactly the same picture you see here. Can you see that? This is the aorta, the LVOT, and this is the LV, and this is the gooseneck here. Okay, I'm showing you the why the LVOT is elongated, why the gooseneck occurs. So here there could be a LVOT obstruction could be due to the discrete subaortic shelf, that is the subaortic membrane, or there could be septal hypertrophy, or abnormal caudal attachment of the superior bridging leaflet could be causing the obstruction, or anomalous papillary muscle or prominent anteroparietal muscle bundles also can cause the obstruction. So if in the examination, what are the causes of LVOT obstruction, one should be able to answer all these things to the examiner. Any question?
No, ma'am. We need to go ahead to the angios because we just have 10 more minutes and we might have to close before that.
Yeah, I'll finish. So Jyotsna was mentioning about the papillary muscles. You can see that the papillary muscles are much closer. And here, sometimes it may appear like single and there may be straddling. So one should understand the difference between the overriding and the straddling. In overriding, there is a gap, like how the jockey is above the horse, not sitting on that. And here you can see that this is the mitral valve where the papillary muscles are attached on either side over the septum. So literally sitting on the septum. So this straddling of the mitral valve attachments is extremely important to be explained to the surgeon. Otherwise, inadvertently, while closing the VSD, if they cut the papillary muscle or the chordate tendineae, it may cause the severe regurgitation later on. So here one has to demonstrate the straddling of the leaflet. When it comes to the straddling, it's very important to know the tricuspid pouching. Sometimes the tricuspid septal leaflet can pouch through the VSD into the LV side, causing like a pouch. So this is called as the tricuspid pouch, and that also has to be demonstrated to the surgeon. Now the two patch technique is used, one patch for closing the ASD and another patch for the VSD separately has to be done whenever the total correction has to be done. So here, as the time is short, we'll go ahead, and the color Doppler is important to make out the regurgitation in these patients, and the associated lesions are PDA in 10%, tetralogy in 10%, DORB in 3%, PGA very rarely, unroofed coronary sinus in 6%. And I think all these things can be read in the textbooks, and the Down syndrome is very common in these patients. So here you can see that there is a ostium primum AST, both are attached at the same level. There is associated TAPVC in this case. This is the common chamber. Confluence is there. No pulmonary veins are draining into LA. LA is small here. LA and LV are small. So to summarize, the morphologies, one should remember ostium primum AST, common atrium, and fossa ovalis PFO may be there, and absence of interatrial shunt rarely due to the complete attachment is there. Interventricular communications have to be looked for, and then AV valves, whether two or single, has to be looked for. Whether there is an accessory orifice is there has to be looked for, and single papillary muscle or two papillary muscles are, that has to be looked for. And the ventricular hypoplasia, whether the RV dominant or LV dominant, should be looked for, and the subtle malalignment, and apart from that, RVOT or LVOT obstruction. So these are the features that we have to look for in any case of AVST. The carry home messages are echocardiography should be like a roadmap to the surgeon, and whether it is AV valve is common or two rings are there has to be mentioned. Common AV valve commitment to the RV or LV should be demonstrated properly. Additional AST, VST should be told, additional associated lesions, and all this has to be told. So to conclude, the echocardiographic features have provided the precise image of images of anatomical features, and this anatomic information is of enormous value to the surgeon in planning the surgical treatment and predicting the outcome. So now we'll move on to the catheterization.
Anita ma'am, would you tell us the indications for doing a cath in the case of AV canal defect?
I already said before we, when we were discussing echo, that there is really no indication for doing a cath for defining structure and anatomy. You can get everything by echocardiography, and the surgeons are pretty comfortable operating on these children just based on the echocardiography only. I think the only reason why you may have to catheterize a child would be if you're suspecting pulmonary vascular disease. So all of them, especially the complete variety, will have pulmonary artery hypertension. However, if they have evidence of pulmonary vascular obstructive disease, that means they do not have evidence of large flow in the, like they do not have much cardiomegaly, they do not have much murmurs, then you may have to think about high pulmonary vascular resistance and you may have to catheterize. And that is more likely to happen in patients or in children with Down syndrome, because Down syndrome tends to develop these changes much earlier than the normal children, non-Down children. So I think the only indications to get pulmonary artery pressures and pulmonary vascular resistance by catheterization, which you cannot get by echocardiography or by, clinical examination also.
But development of
So,
PAH
a 15-month-old
vascular disease is much earlier. So ideally for many of the patients, it might be required, no ma'am?
Yes. So I think when it comes to non-downs, we are hardly ever catheterize anybody below the age of 1 year. But when it comes to downs, we have catheterized children even at 6 or 8 or 9 months of age, because in children in Down syndrome, if you get the data which is sort of plus minus, like you don't have much cardiomegaly, you don't have much murmurs in the form of flow murmurs, ECG is not showing left ventricular hypertrophy or left ventricular volume overload, we have catheterized these children because Downs is pretty unpredictable. And this girl is, this one is 15-month-old and with Downs. I think this child will definitely need to be catheterized before you can send her for surgery, because she has complete AVSD, she has severe pulmonary arterial hypertension, and therefore the likelihood of operability has to be tested.
Okay. So
one more thing, madam, because it is going to have a multiple levels of the shunts, like ASD, VSD, and sometimes even PDA also. Is it worth calculating the degree of the shunt at each level?
No.
Only the PA.
I would just calculate the total QP, total pulmonary blood flow, to total pulmonary vascular resistance, and then go by that. It will be very hard for you to, very systematically say this is a atrial level, this much is a ventricular level, because even if there is a small ASD, if this child has tricuspid regurgitation, you're going to get a step up at RI also. So that's not really going to give you the information. What we are interested in is in the total step up from the mixed venous saturation to pulmonary artery, and of course, then calculate the PVRI.
Can you go to the next slide? Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is the CAT data of the child, for 15 months old, with a BMI of 13.29 and a hemoglobin of 15 and oxygen concentration of 169. The catheter courses to the right femoral vein IVC RA, through the RV PA to the wedge, and through the ASD into the LA, the right femoral artery aorta into LV. Coming to the SAT data, the femoral artery saturations were 90/60 with a mean of 70. LV was also nearly 90 with a diastole of 0.0 to 5, RA of 2 and a wedge of 5, RV of 80/0 to 3, and the PA pressures of around 76/26 with a mean of 45. So as you see, there is the RV pressures are high, almost RV and LV pressures are almost equal, and PA pressures are also elevated, suggestive of severe PAH.
Yeah, so the pressures are quite high expectedly, because you have a large VSD or large communication between LV and RV. You expect RV and LV pressures to be equal. You may get a small amount of gradient across the pulmonary valve because of flow. Like over here, it is negligible, but you may get 10-15 millimeter gradient. So your PA pressure may be 10-15 millimeters lower than the RV pressure because of the flow gradient. Why RA is 2 and PA wedge is 5 is very, very difficult to explain, because if there is a large ASD also, primum as well as secundum, as you showed on echocardiography, then you expect RA and LA pressures to be equal, considering that pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is predicting LA pressure. So it's possible that the wedge is not very well taken, and that is why you have a gradient. Normally, RA and LA should not have any gradient. And I think another thing that we must know is that in patients with atrioventricular septal defect, sometimes you enter LV directly from RA without even getting into LA. So you may not get LA pressure very well in these patients, because the catheter tends to just get from RA, it goes to LV. You think you are in RV, but you are actually in LV. If you see in the lateral view, you will realize that you are actually posteriorly placed. So the catheter tends to go from RA to LV. That's very usual, and it doesn't go to LA. Or you cannot record the LA pressure. So probably that is the reason why you don't have LA pressure over here. But if you look at the saturations, I think there is a significant step up from superior vena cava plus inferior vena cava. I don't know what is MVO2. What is MVO2? Mixed venous should be SVC IVC, no? It should be 45-50 only, because mixed venous is SVC IVC.
Yes,
so you have from from SVC to PA, you have a 40% step up, which is a huge step up, and very, very importantly, you have fully saturated aorta. So in this particular child, your PVRI is not going to be very high because you have a 40% step up. However, if you had not such a high step up, or if the femoral artery was little desaturated, it would have been wise to give oxygen and do an oxygen study again to test operability. Oxygen study is associated with lots of fallacies, but still I think that's the commonly used vasodilator that we use in the cath lab. But here, going by the oximetry, I don't see the need to do oxygen study in this child, because your calculated PVRI is going to be, I think, within reasonably operable range. But this is usually not the case in Down syndrome. The step-ups are not so high, and therefore you end up giving them oxygen and repeating their data on oxygen as a vasodilator testing method, and then calculating PVRI in basal state and on oxygen.
What are the angios that you suggest to do in this?
So I think, as I said, you really don't require any angio, because you have everything by the echocardiography. However, once you are inside, it's often a practice to do angio. So I would just do an LV angio in the LAO and RAO view. RAO view will show you very typical bruise and deformity, and LAO view will show us the BSD as well as LV to RA shunt, which is again a common feature in patients of ABSD. So an LV angio in LAO and RAO, but please enter the LV from the femoral artery. Don't try to enter from the right atrium to left atrium to left ventricle, because then you might get AV valve regurgitation because of catheter. So it's better not to cross the AV valve with the catheter when you're doing an angio. So use the arterial catheter from the femoral artery into aorta into LV, and then do angio in the LV in two views. And the second angio should be in the aortic root or little above the aortic root, to look for PDA, to look for coag, to look for aortic regurgitation, the usual views that we do for VSD. So 3 angios. If you have a biplane, you can do with 2 angios, LV angio in AP and LV angio in RAO and LAO, and an aortic root angio is all that you need.
And entering the LV from the RV also, will it go through inlet VSD or something into LV, or as you said, through the RA when you are trying to go to the LA?
Yeah, entering LV from RV is difficult, because the VSD is very, very posteriorly located, because it's an inlet VSD. But often you will enter from RA into LV. That's the usual story. In fact, very often it's difficult to get into RV and PA. It's easier to get into LV. And we think we are in RV, but we're actually in LV. And therefore, you cannot manipulate your catheter into the pulmonary artery because of that reason. So very often, our catheter from RA goes to LV and not RV.
Okay. Next slide, please.
So this one shows a very high QP. As you can see, you expected it because the PA saturation was 90%. So pulmonary flow is 12, pulse systemic flow is 2.4, and you have a total shunt of 9.8. Now, again, as we were discussing, I wouldn't worry much about where the shunt is happening, whether it is at atrial level or ventricular level, simply because if there is tricuspid regurgitation, which is usually the case, and this child also has tricuspid regurgitation, then the step up at RA level can come from VSD also, because there is a step up at the ventricular level and then there's a regurgitation. So to say that ASD is shunting 1.6 and VSD is shunting 8.16 will be very, very tough to say. But PVR is 6.4 units. Now the PVRI is 4.24. So how have we calculated PVRI? Because I expected PVRI to be higher than PVR, because BS is less than 1. So I suspect the PVR is 4.2 and PVRI is 6.4. Because when the BS is less than 1, then you expect PVRI to be higher than PVR.
This should have been higher.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, even if it is PVRI 6.4, even then I think it's not prohibitively high. You have a ratio of 0.36, which is sort of borderline. 0.3 is the ideal. You have a little borderline, but going by the fact that she has a huge step up and the fact that her FA is fully saturated, she has cardiomegaly, I would think that she's operable, and perhaps an oxygen study is not required.
What is the BMI?
13.5.
But BSA will be quite low, I think. Because she's 8.50 kg.
Oxygen study is not required, ma'am.
If you say that PVRI is 4. No. I think oxygen study would be required for PVRI. So sometimes you can't calculate PVRI in the lab while you are doing the case. So you give them the benefit of doubt and you do oxygen study. But once you showed me the data where you have an SVC to PA saturation of, step up of 40%, 50 to 90, and you have an FA saturation of 97%. I would think that her PVRI is going to come within operable range, and I wouldn't do an oxygen study. You can go back one slide, and maybe I can just explain a little better.
One slide back, please.
Even there is a question that when there is a mean pressures as well as PA pressures are almost near to the systemic. So even though the shunt is good, is that requires to do the oxygen study?
No, as I said, I wouldn't do oxygen study if I have seen the step up of 40%, because if you try and calculate the PVRI, PA mean is 45, PA wedge is 5. So it will be 45 minus 5, which is 40. And then you have to divide it by QP. Now, if you look at the saturation in pulmonary artery, it is 90%. Considering pulmonary vein to be 98%, your QP is going to be 12, 13, 14. It's going to be more than 10 by all means. And therefore, your PVRI is going to be 4. And then there is no need for an oxygen study. So two facts that I can see in your data would make oxygen study quite redundant. One, that the FS saturation is full, and second, you have a step above 40%, and your P is 90. That means AV oxygen difference in the pulmonary artery is only 8%. So your QP is going to be really quite high. And here, I think if you have a QP of 12, that's what you showed me, then 45 minus 5 is 40. 40 divided by 12 is actually 3 point something, not even 4. And I think it's very much within operable range.
So one indirect indication is the step up of almost 40. I mean, yes. Above, I mean, anything specific that above so much, it is an indirect indication that it is operable?
I think if you get PA and RV both 90, I would say 90 or above. In fact, even if it is 85 and above, and you have SVC of 50, 40 or 55, you are going to get, your QP is going to be very high. If your PA and RV both are giving you 90%, then your PVR and then your QP is going to be very high, because pulmonary vein you're assuming is 98%. So I think it gives you an indirect indication, sort of an indication. But yes, if you have any doubt, since you are there, since you're in the lab, your catheter is inside, there's no harm in doing an oxygen study. Only thing is it may not be required. But if you have any doubt, it's better to give oxygen and repeat the study right there and then, rather than come out and then you find your PVR is coming as borderline 7, 6 like that. Then you'll have to go back and do the entire thing again, because the whole purpose of catheterizing this child is actually to find out PVR.
The degree of AV valve regurgitation, will it affect the surgery, and do we need to show that on angio?
I think again you can see it very well on echo, the degree of AV regurgitation. Yes, if you're there, if your catheter is there, you might as well do an LV angio. I mean, I'm okay with that. We also do that once we are taking them up, but we are not taking them up to define MR. We are taking them up for PVRI. But yes, if you are there, your catheter is LV, why not do 2 angios if the patient is stable? Why not?
Sure, ma'am.
But we have to be sure that we don't induce any ectopics during angiography, because if you induce ectopic, then your quantification of AV valve regurgitation is going to be wrong.
Okay. Mr. Rahul, do we have time that we can spare some 10 minutes for a few angios to be shown by Vijayalakshmi ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, we do have time. I would exit the screen.
Okay, fine. Anita ma'am, thank you so much. If you can continue with us, or else if you have a meeting, you can leave us, ma'am. It's fine. And thanks a lot for that, ma'am.
I will have to leave, Lalita. I'm already 10 minutes late, so I'll have to leave.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot, ma'am. We'll continue with Vijayalakshmi, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita, madam. Thank you very much.
Vijayalakshmi, ma'am. Yes, please. Ma'am, you need to unmute yourself, Vijayalakshmi, ma'am.
Ma'am, please
unmute. Ma'am, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
As Dr. Anita has already told, we get all the information in echo. Only when we have a suspicion to calculate the PVRI, when there is a PAH, we have to do the cath. And also when there is a pulmonary vascular obstructive disease associated, or when there is an associated anomalies which are not well visualized on the echo, then only we do the, it's not moving to the next. Okay. Now, somebody was asking why it goes into the LV. So here you can see that this is the right heart catheter, and Anita told that it goes straight into the LV. That is because as soon as it enters the RA, there is an ostium primum AST at a very lower level. And you can see that that catheter goes at a lower level and straight it drops into the LV. And that's how we know the right heart catheter easily goes into the what to say, like LV rather than the RV. So for RV you have to manipulate, whereas here as soon as it enters the middle of the RA, through the ostium primum AST, it drops into the LV. And through the AST, it can go into the pulmonary vein also to get the pulmonary vein wedge pressure. The Park et al. In their study, they showed that mean arterial saturation is 95% in partial AVST. Pulmonary vascular resistance was less than 5 units in almost 80%. Though clinically we suspect PH, but on cath, nearly 80% of them are operable. And in incomplete AVST, mean arterial saturation was 92% without any perivascular disease. And hence, many patients, though we think it's what to say, Down syndrome is there, PH is there, they develop PH very early, all those fear are there in the mind. But when you have a doubt, do the cath and then find out whether it is possible or not. Now, what are the causes of gooseneck deformity? It is basically because of the elongated LVOT and abnormally low insertion of the anterior leaflet of the left AV valve, and deficiency in the diaphragmatic wall of the LV, and disproportionately short inlet of the septum as compared to the outlet septum. And because of these reasons, you get the gooseneck. Invariably in the YVOC, they'll ask you what is the gooseneck and what are the causes, and these are the 3 causes to be told. Now, this is the classical angio. This is the right heart catheter, the NIH catheter. Through the ostium primum AST, it has dropped into the LV. And the LV angiogram is done in the LAO and RIO also. Both are shown. And look at the negative shadow here. This is the gooseneck deformity. Can you see that? This is the aorta, that is the LVOT, and this is the superior bridging leaflet. And you can see the cleft also here. And through the cleft, you can see that there is the MR jet coming. See, that is the, through the cleft, the MR jet is coming. So this is how the classical gooseneck deformity is there. And here the angiography includes the assessment of the existence of the ventricular components and the AV valves, the LVOT obstruction, RVOT obstruction, and LV injection has to be done in the different views. And to conclude, whether it is echo or angio or any CT angio, one thing you must remember, the position of the AV node cannot be shown by any of these modalities. And ultimately, the surgeon has to be very careful with the AV node. Otherwise, they can injure. The AV node injury is extremely common while repairing these patients. So whether it is a partial AV canal or a complete AV canal defect, the AV node cannot be made out, position and the place by either echo or angio or CT angio. So the surgeon has to use their clinical acumen. And to conclude, friends, before I thank you, this is Richard Van Pra. His wife is Stella Van Pra. So whenever you read the book, you have Richard Van Pra and Van Pra. Other Van Pra is his wife, that is Stella. She's no more. And he is a great guy who has done so much of work on the autopsies of almost all the anomalies, and he has got a varieties of AV canal defects, and I had a pleasure to work with him in Boston Children. Thank you very much for the kind attention, and thank you Josna and Lalita and all the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam.